Hello and welcome to the Big Yearning podcast. We are two life coaches who really enjoy meaningful discussions about big questions. Our work and our lives have been very much shaped by these questions, and they've taken us to some amazing places in our lives and within ourselves. We all long for things. We all carry big yearnings in our hearts, and over the next hour or so, we hope to touch on some of these yearnings and perhaps give you some ideas or insights to help you be clearer about what you long for and how to get it. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of the Big Yearning podcast. My name's Neil. I'm the one who's strong on right brain, big picture, being in flow and all that kind of stuff, but not so great on left brain, precision, being concrete, detail, etc.
And my name's Alexander, and I'm the one who's relentlessly pushing to get the most out of life, but I'm not always great at stopping, resting, and appreciating the moment.
A very, very warm welcome to everyone listening, to new and existing listeners alike. If this is your first time tuning into us, just to let you know that you can follow us on social media through our Facebook and Instagram accounts. And as we often say at the beginning of the podcast, this podcast very much thrives on your feedback. So please do let us know your thoughts and feelings about what we're doing, about anything you hear on the podcast. And if there's any topics that you would like us to discuss, please do get in touch with us about that. We really thrive on your suggestions for topics. Today, we have our very first guest on the podcast. That's Jamie Webb. Jamie will be talking a lot more later. Jamie is a sports therapist based in Brighton, the owner and operator of Brighton-based Sports Therapist. And in his sports therapy work, Jamie has taken quite a journey, both personally and professionally, which has led him to making the mind-body relationship an integral part to how you help people with pain and injuries. So I'm dead excited about having our first guest. I think it's going to be great. But before we get into the meatiness of that, we will do our regular check-in. Listeners who regularly tune in will know that me and Alexander do a check-in. And it's always really important, I feel, just to say why we're doing this, why we're doing a check-in. So for me, a check-in is it's a way of holding myself to account, being witnessed by someone else, and staying honest, true, and authentic in terms of who I am and how I'm showing up in this moment. So with no further ado, over to you, Alexander, to check in today.
Thank you, Neil. I'm doing very well at the moment. I feel like life is beginning to settle after the whole lockdown and coronavirus thing. Here in the UK, things are opening up pretty well. I've been seeing a lot more friends. I've been meeting up with people. We even had a bit of a socially distanced birthday party last weekend, which was fantastic. A friend of mine turned 40 and he's had a really hard year, sort of, as we all have, being locked indoors and not being able to see people, not being able to get out of his home, not being able to get a break from the constant work and the parenting. So it was just wonderful to be able to celebrate him a little bit. For myself, I would say, I was thinking about this and I was reflecting this morning about what I was going to say about my, what I was going to say for my check-in. And I thought about Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf says, it's the deep breath before the plunge. And I think my life has a lot of feeling of that at the moment. There's a lot of prep going on in my life. It's just trying to get all the pieces in order so that I can really launch things in a big way. And that feels very exciting, but it also feels there's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. Every time that you see a business really explode in some way, every time you see a new promotional thing, every time you see a new product, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. So I've been working on a new website. I've got a new logo coming through. There's a next round of book promotions for my book, Deep Joy. And I booked a photo shoot with Emma Bailey in Brighton. She's fantastic. Really looking forward to that. Although it's also terrifying having to stand in all the ways and being instructed in all these ways. And it's odd. But anyway, looking forward to my photo shoot. I've had a load of coaching clients, and that's been wonderful. I mean, the work is so amazing. I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do what I do for a living. But yes, there's just so much planning and checking. I'm checking my 5-year plan and making sure that that's all going in the right direction. And so just a lot of behind the scenes tinkering and writing and plotting and planning and meeting and bouncing ideas off friends and colleagues, and things are going in amazing directions, but I'm hoping that it'll all bloom later in the year. So that's kind of what things mostly feel like for me at the moment. I think the only other thing I wanted to check in about today was we've had a run of local elections here in the UK, and it triggers a lot of stuff for me. I get very angry about the disengagement of most people with the political process. I get very angry about the direction that politics is going, and it's more to do with what does it say about us as a society? What does it say about us as a culture that we make these kinds of choices over and over again, that we allow those who are cunning and manipulative to be able to get their way to power, and those who actually want to do good in the world are always left behind. And I always had this temptation to just disengage, to switch off the news, to park it, to say I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to. This is such a grotty, nasty, broken system that I'm going to choose not to be involved. And I also know that allows those cunning and manipulative and selfish people to win every time. They're the people who rely on people of conscience to give up. So just trying to find a middle way that isn't burning out by being overly involved, but also isn't just totally giving up and disengaging. Trying to work out where are we going with politics in the UK. The Tories have really solidified their hold on power, and there doesn't seem to be anything to challenge them. And I'm not sure I believe in any of the other parties. So just working through my feelings around that, my thoughts around that. What is my approach to this going to be? How am I going to respond? Do I just want to get involved in something like Extinction Rebellion? Do I want to get involved in politics in a more direct way? I don't know what the answers are here, but this is all stirred up stuff for me, and that's on my mind a lot at the moment. So all that together, I think that's probably my check-in.
Thank you, Alexander. I'm very aware that, we don't plan. We often don't know what each other is going to say. So it's very interesting because the first part of my check-in relates to some of what you've just said. Now, I think most people who meet me would probably say I'm an introvert or quite kind of introspective. There's something happened over the weekend. I listened to some material which made me really go inward and think about some of the stuff that you've just talked about. So I listened to a podcast called Folk on Foot, and the interviewer was interviewing probably my favourite creative artist and performer of the moment, an English folk singer called Chris Wood, who addresses a lot of contemporary social issues with a kind of searing emotional precision, in my view. He's really kind of on the money for me. And he said this, and I'll quote it in full. And before quoting it in full, I want to make the point that for me, even though he talks about political ideologies here, I take what he says to be a broader cultural comment about the society that he finds himself living in, and I agree with him, which I find myself living in too. So he said, the left has always fought its battles on an issue-by-issue basis, and that's fine if it's folk against fascism or the civil rights movement or something like that. There you've got a palpable issue, but you cannot fight neoliberalism in that way. Neoliberalism operates on a cellular level. It's like going out with Excalibur to fight fog. I just don't think people have got their heads around that. So this really made me think, and I really love the wonderfully descriptive nature of that metaphor, like going out with Excalibur to fight fog. And it makes me think and contemplate, how do I encounter, how do I be with, how do I sort of live amidst all of these cultural assumptions and attitudes and beliefs and behaviours that are so much the kind of warp and weft of our society that we live in. When I talk about these things, I'm thinking about particular ideas about progress, about the meaning of success, about the place of the other than human life within this ideology, and ideas about the individual versus the collective. And how this kind of, like he says, on a cellular level, this stuff kind of goes really, really deep in. And I'm not here trying to make a kind of philosophical point, but I'm really trying to go grapple with it for myself. So there's a really open question like, how do I first identify all the different ways in which this stuff manifests? And how do I really kind of engage with it? And then referencing what you just said, Alexander, without becoming, say, disillusioned or tuning out or burning out, how do I really kind of come towards that? And it's really interesting. In another piece on the internet from Chris Wood, in his lockdown set, he came to the conclusion that his thing was to grow a garden and be kind. And I can relate to that, and that might sound quite sort of simplistic, but you can take that at a literal level, or you can take that at a metaphorical level. Like, being kind is obvious and literal, but growing a garden, the invitation for me is like, what kind of a garden would I like to grow? You know, and that might be a garden of kind of relationships with different kinds of people, not just vegetables and flowers, for example. So that really got me thinking, really, really touched into the sensitive side of me. And the second thing that is really, really up for me is a really, really incredibly joyful thing. We've got a blackbird nesting in our garden, and it is just, I'm like a little 6-year-old just bouncing around with kind of glee. So I go and say hello to Mrs. Blackbird every morning, and I go and say goodnight to her every night, and I kind of speak to her. And then I'm reminded of several years ago, Prince Charles got outed for speaking to his vegetables, didn't he? And I'm wondering, oh dear, how am I going to come across on the podcast as speaking to this blackbird in my garden?
You don't come across like Prince Charles.
Don't I? Okay, thanks, no. Alexander. And when me and my partner moved here 5 years ago, we wanted to buy a house which had enough space for my partner to build a workroom. And so we needed space anyway, but we didn't have kind of top priority thoughts about a garden, although I knew I wanted a garden, but I didn't quite know how I was going to sculpt a garden or create a garden or anything. And one of my dreams has always been to, I guess, attract more wildlife into the garden. So it's this blackbird in the garden is a kind of culmination of a particular kind of dream, if you like. And it just spins off a whole load of different things for me. Like, I thought I had this idea the other day of like attaching a spoon to a long garden cane and putting some birdseed or some mealworms on the end of it and feeding Mrs. Blackbird. But then I thought, oh, well, no, hang on, Neil, you shouldn't interfere with nature in inverted commas. And then I thought, yeah, just best leave it to its own devices. And I don't want to go taking loads of kind of photographs of it because that might kind of give it post-traumatic stress or something like that. And then I thought about how would I feel if it got predated by a sparrowhawk or a crow or a magpie or a jay? Would I be okay with that? Would I be okay if it got predated by a domestic cat? So all of these kind of like, it's almost like the blackbird and her nesting. She's on 4 eggs. It's almost become a kind of like a little reminder to me, or a kind of microcosm about, how am I wanting to relate to the other than human world? And so in this world for me, which often spins with an awful lot of insanity, not entirely, but an awful lot, here's this little nugget of beauty and joy and a little bit of nature doing what it does in my back garden. So that's probably a longer check-in than I usually do. I'm aware of that. But I wanted to kind of share my joy with people this morning. So, yeah, so that's me. So, with no further ado, over to you, Jamie, love to hear how you are today for your check-in.
Great, thanks, Neil. Really enjoyed, I would say I'm more in line with Alexander, really. I'm the one who's guesting, but I'm the one who kind of focuses on the future and, again, probably struggles with the moments in the present, a bit like Alexander is. And it's just a really interesting insight and probably a lesson to me from Neil there to enjoy those little things and the joy that can be had. My overall sense is a huge sense of gratitude for you guys to invite me on today. Very aware that I've got a lot of things to say, and hopefully they come out in the right order. Really keen to kind of add value to your listenership. I really enjoy, I'm very passionate about my work, but that's done in a one-to-one basis, in a situation that I am very familiar with. I've been doing it for 17 years. So I kind of know my stuff. My clinic room is my happy space. Podcasting is my new space, shall we say. This is the second one I've done. I did one a couple of years ago, which I very much enjoyed with a personal trainer. And I'm super excited to do this one with you guys today. As you both know, I'm a bit of a groupie of yours. I was hoping to proudly come on and say I'd listened to all of your podcasts. I'm just 2 behind because I've had a couple of busy months. But very really aware of the trying to add some value to your listeners and get my message across rather than a one-to-one basis in a one-to-many, and trying to kind of inspire hope and change in some of your listeners. My base aim for today is if I can improve the quality of one of your listeners' lives by what I say, then that's job done from my perspective. If it's more than that, then I'm extra happy. Interesting what Alexander was saying about the breath before the plunge. I'm a massive sci-fi geek, much like Alexander. So we've both promised Neil that we won't go down that rabbit hole today, just to keep it relevant for you guys. But the breath before the plunge feels exactly right. I'm not fully up to speed yet, I think. I kind of, with respect to how horrible COVID has been for everyone, the whole break, I'll just say the whole break and lockdowns have actually been quite good for me personally. And it's I want to be very careful when I say that, and respectful, obviously, of people who've been tragically affected by the whole thing. And I'm just a bit resistant to go back up to the full speed that I was at prior to the first lockdown. So there's a lot of stuff I'm working through on that. I'm feeling pressures to speed up, but a resistance from inside to not speed up to the same level that I was previously. I've seen the error of my ways, I suppose. And I know that, for long-standing health and well-being benefits, and pain and injuries, coming back to my stuff, which we'll go into more detail, I'm sure, very soon. Just want to look after myself a little bit better than probably traditionally I have done. Interesting, I'm not a political animal at all, really. I wouldn't say that of myself. But interesting, when Alexander was speaking, it really brought up quite a bit for me. So I am the kind of disengaged, if you like. But equally, it's kind of like, I want to do something, but what do you do? So kind of similar thoughts to Alexander there. And it's me, I've always wanted to do that kind of happiness index rather than be working on, the GDP being assessed with, economic expansion all the time. I think they actually believe they do something along those lines in some countries, maybe New Zealand or something like that. It's a much more important indicator of how successful we are, I think. I know a happiness index is it's not an objective measure. It's not a number, shall we say, or you can make it into a number, I'm sure, with some statistical analysis. But yeah, there's stuff around that for me. And I'm very environmental as well. And I'm mildly encouraged by Joe Biden's first few months in term. And so, it really brought up things around that politically for me. But as to what to do about that, I'm still waiting. It will come to me.
Thank you, Jamie. Lovely to hear from you. Thank you. Okay, so we're checked in. So, Jamie, I'd like to invite you to speak a bit about yourself, to speak about what you do. You've already mentioned that one of the things you would like to bring today is is some hope for people listening, and how you might bring about some change in people's lives through your work and what you say here. So my invitation is for you to kind of say who you are and what you do, and then if you can give us a brief insight into that, then we'll go into some questions. I'm sure me and Alexander, I know, are kind of champing at the bit to get in there. We've got our list of questions, so no pressure. I'd love to hear a bit about you and what you do.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Neil. I think what I'll do for that is just try and think of a very brief life history. Don't get too comfortable, guys. Don't worry. So I think if I tell you my life story and kind of just interweave that very briefly with my journey through sports therapy, it tells the full story and about my journey, but also how I've learned to understand the mind-body connection as well. I'm very aware, and I want to keep the mind-body connection at the front. So I grew up in South Wales, and I went to university in Bath and studied computer software technology. I don't like to admit that freely, but obviously I've just done that on a public channel. I'm sure we're hearing back about that. And it was one of those decisions where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I think Neil's spoken on a previous episode of a similar story with his life. And it was very much meandering, and I meandered from the IT degree into an IT job. And I've always been athletic in my life. I can get very average at most sports very quickly. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm okay. I'm not amazing. And so sport has been an important part of my life. And it was during that time really that I noticed that if I didn't do my sport, I wasn't the same person. I think that's how I made sense of it myself at that time. And the life as it kind of just tumbled into, it wasn't what I'd planned. It's just what I'd fall into. There was some kind of depressive stuff building around that time. And I now know that was a trigger for injuries I started getting. I was kind of using exercise as a coping strategy for not being happy in my life. So it was a beautiful thing, really, because what happened was I started getting these injuries, some of them for obvious reasons, some of them for less obvious reasons. And I started going for some physiotherapy. And I still remember the session to this day where the physiotherapist I went to see, he said, "Oh, well, mate, your knee pain is because your glute isn't firing." And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And that really was the spark that ignited the flame. And that must have been, in excess of 20 years ago now. And so I kind of knew that I wanted to change career, and I didn't know how to do it. And I thankfully got made redundant. I knew I wanted to be made redundant, but I didn't have the balls to go for it. I was just wondering, could I say the word balls on the podcast? And then I always remember Alexander, grab life by the balls. So yeah, I can say balls on this podcast. I didn't have the balls to go for the redundancy, but I got kind of kicked anyway, which was the kick up the backside that I really needed. So I looked around and was looking, can I do physiotherapy? Can I do sports therapy? Physiotherapy was going to take me a long time to get to. For those that don't know, sports therapy was a breakaway just over 30 years or so ago. And it kind of concentrates on what they call musculoskeletal stuff. So bits that hurt, basically, rather than the more kind of hospitalized version of physiotherapy. I hope I said that in the appropriate way for any physiotherapists listening. And I chose sports therapy and set up my first practice shortly after my qualification. I was doing lots of sports massage at the time. And that was all really the only tool I had in my kit. Started getting some really positive feedback, and as someone who isn't 100% sure of themselves, I can come across as confident. Hopefully, I'm starting to do that on this podcast. I don't know, but there's that kind of questioning yourself below the surface. I was just starting to get really nice feedback, which was really great. Some helping people with injuries they'd had for a long time, and certain cases where I was just helping people and doing things and said, oh, the doctors had said I had arthritis in this shoulder and you've done some massage around it and it's feeling better. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And didn't think much more of that, but, parked it and kind of worked around it. And what I noticed as things progressed is that sports massage was great for some things, and then some things it just didn't touch. So then I went off and did some courses with a guy called Professor Graham Smith, who's the head of our Society of Sports Therapists. And he basically taught me how to mobilize any joint you like. So give me a joint, I'll mobilize it. And I still enjoy that. Did that for many years. And again, so that kind of connected where the nerves are, where the muscles go to. I could do both there. And that was great. And that worked in some instances, but didn't work in others. So then I went off and thought, okay, there's something missing here. So I went off to a course by a group called the NOI Group, Neuro Orthopedic Institute. They have some great stuff. I'd recommend your listeners check out on pain. I might use one of their quotes later if we get to it. And they talked about overall sensitization and sensitivity to conditions. And they really started talking about stress. And I won't go there, guys, don't worry. I've got a molecular level description as to why stress increases our sensitivity to pain. The analogy involves a snooker table with pockets that get larger, in case you're interested. Maybe we'll do that as an extra episode another time. But so that really, and in the kind of the physio sports therapy textbook, they talk about stress and psychological factors as a thing, but they just say that. And I'd always read that in the textbooks and said, oh yeah, that's a thing. I was already interested in my own stuff, as I mentioned previously. But this started to open my eyes to that. So I kind of had what I thought was the complete mechanical picture there. Kind of got a vague sense of the psychology. We've got the nerves. I could follow the nerves down from the vertebrae down to the muscle they were working, and we'd see lots of changes. But still, some things weren't happening. And then, must be 10 years ago now, I went on a guy by this South African physiotherapist called Douglas Heel. And maverick is the word that springs to mind. Provocative is another word. And he just likes to tear everything up. He's incredibly well-read. He's a bit of a Marmite kind of character. Very, you either love him or hate him. Marmite is exactly the right thing. Incredible, and he's just so knowledgeable. He's come up with this system, but the key thing, and it's a very good system physically. I won't go into detail on this, but what he continued to open my eyes was how the body can hold onto emotional things in a physical way. And when I started using some of his techniques, that's when I started seeing kind of an emotional release from physical work that I was doing. And that was a real eye-opener. It has to be permission-based when you're in the clinic one-to-one. We set some ground rules, much as I'm sure you guys do when you see your clients for the first time. It's something along the lines of, well, firstly, this work I can do can be painful. It can be not painful, depending on what kind of person you are, what you need. And same, we have some of this stuff can be emotional if you want it to be. If you don't want it to be, let me know that's fine too. And so that really opened my eyes to the emotional side of things. And that kind of helped me build my practice. That was my mind-body kind of offering, I suppose, and gave me a unique way of doing things because of my technical background, because of how I join things together. The joining together was just after that, really, a book called Anatomy Trains. Again, anyone who's technically interested, just gives you permission to understand how you could rub the base of someone's skull and it could ease a pain that they have in the base of their foot. Incredible work that's ongoing. It's not widely accepted medically yet. They're going through a lot of work to make it more medically accepted, but it's not there just yet. And then I kind of got married, kind of got married and got stressed. That sounds terrible. My wife is going to listen to this, so I feel I should quantify that a little bit more. There was some stuff around having to build up a business. I bought the practice about the same time, near bankrupt myself doing that. Super proud of myself for doing that. But I was just working too hard. Simple as that. And I'd met this guy called Alexander Butler. You may have heard of him. And we met. We were told to meet basically by a mutual therapist at the centre we were working at. So you guys have got to meet. She knew Alexander well for his mind work that she was doing. She knew me well for and appreciated the physical work that I did on her. And obviously I made her aware of the mind connection to what was going on with her body as well. And she said, "You guys need to meet." And we did, and we did some swap sessions. And Alexander, being the perceptive person that he is, recognized I needed a little bit of time for the full deep coaching version. And so I had to go away. And it was really just after the birth of my daughter, really, that I just really began to struggle with all of my old baggage that I'd buried for a long time. Myself and Alexander become good friends in the meantime, over a few beers and geeking out over Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, etc. And I just reached out to Alexander. I said, "Mate, I need your help here. My coping strategies aren't working." Bigging him up here, I can see his face. But it has been a completely life-changing experience. In terms of so anyone thinking about using his services, there you go. There's the plug, Alexander. But from that point, what that's done is it's opened me out even more to the psychological side of things and understanding, the process that Alexander's helped me through. I'm not trying to be Alexander with the work that I do with my clients, but it's about acknowledging that is a thing and just helping people kind of move along that direction in the way in the way that they need to, really. And then just to bring it fully up to speed, is that the more recently, last couple of years, the Anatomy Trains book I referenced earlier, the way they interrupt these things is by using fascia. Now, for those that don't know, the fascia, if you imagine kind of layers, for those that aren't vegetarian, the easiest way to describe this is that when you pull off a bit of chicken skin, when you're preparing a bit of meat and there's a sinewy see-through film underneath it, that's the fascia. Now, the fascia provides the structure and how we hold ourselves. So for me, it's really good for changing alignment, if you like. But actually what I've noticed in the last couple of years as I've been doing more and more fascia work, and the Anatomy Trains guys say this themselves, is that our stress and our trauma is held within that layer. So as we're unraveling the fascia, what we find is I'm seeing more and more emotional releases. The more I do that. What's great with the fascia work is a little more gentler than the muscular work, so it's actually less painful, but actually I think longer term more powerful. So just to summarize, I'm very aware that I did go on a little bit there. That's my journey through it, and it's just an amalgam of all of those things that I speak of. So hopefully we've still got some listeners after that.
I'm sure we have. I'm certainly still listening, Jamie. Thank you. I know Alexander is. Thank you. It's really interesting. I felt I got a really strong, kind of well-paced sense of your journey, very thoroughgoing. So thank you. Alexander, would you like to kick off with a question for Jamie?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I've done a little bit of the physical stuff with you, Jamie, and I'm really glad to hear that things are less painful these days, because I do remember seeing you back in the day and it was very sore. But I remember coming to you and I would say things like, "Oh, I've got this weak spot in my back. That's where it always goes when I'm at the gym or whatever." And you found that really interesting and you honed straight in on it. And I think, having spoken to you for years about this stuff, that people often come to you and they say, "I've got this weak spot," or "I've got this place I always pick up injuries." Where does that come from? Like, why do people have that?
It's a really interesting question. I'll try and make my answer to this one a lot briefer than the last one. I think the concept of weakness is a really interesting one, and I think we have to be careful of that. if you believe you have a weakness, then you will. That you can kind of easily see that, I hope, from a conscious level. But I think these things kind of filter really deeply into our unconscious. Going off on one slightly, if you have, say, your mother has had a knee replacement because she had arthritis, if you're of a certain mindset, you think, well, I'm bound to get knee problem because my mother had arthritis. Do you see what I mean? So there's a thing, we have to be careful with the language we choose here. On a flip side, I think strengthening to go against, I'll go against the whole physiotherapy industry. I think strengthening is overrated. I'll just say it, I'll just throw it out there. Most people that I see, and that's not 100% obviously, most people I see are too tight. Tension leads to dysfunction. So I read an article years ago, and I've kind of hung on to this line because it's easy. A 30% increase in tightness in a muscle leads to 100% loss of function. And most of us, I was going to say we're British. Living in Brighton, my client base is very multicultural. But as British people, we tend to hold ourselves too tense. I think as people of planet Earth, I think, let's be honest, most of us are dealing, as you guys know, with a lot of old stress, a lot of old trauma, and we just tense up in response to that. And it's that tension actually that gives a lot of weakness. Now, going back to your question, Alexander, why does it hit that point? That's the je ne sais quoi of the whole situation. My normal get-out answer to this question is everything that's gone before. And what I mean by that is everything in your life that has gone before. So perhaps some old stress, some old trauma, that kind of thing, how you hold yourself tense. But equally, some old physical injuries, maybe you sprained your ankle years ago and you've been hobbling, subconsciously, you were hobbling around very consciously initially to avoid the pain because it's not very pleasant. And that movement pattern kind of stayed with you to a certain degree. Perhaps a response to the emotion that you express during the day. We all have our favorite positions, actually, which we adopt. Actually, we might try it now, guys, if you're up for this, and listeners can try along with themselves. My view is we always have a side that we prefer leaning down to. You can do it whether you're standing or whether you're sitting. And sometimes I use visualizing having a pint in a pub with my clients, and we'll all kind of pretend. So you'll drink with one hand, and you probably want to lean with the other. So for me, I tend to my kind of bored work posture, if you like, is I use the mouse right-handed. I'm actually left-handed, but I lean down on my left arm, and then I reach forward with my right hand. Now,
yeah, I do the same. Yeah.
Now, if you just spin right down the other way, Alexander, so you now lean down on the right, and imagine you had a mouse in it just feels awkward.
That's wrong.
Yeah. So we all have our positions of comfort. Now, this is just a thing, again, that you may have copied one of your parents. It might be in response to an old injury you had. It might be in response to some old emotions that you had. All of those things. Now, normally, in normal function, you might have that movement pattern, you get away with it. But then you might do something else that means you no longer get away with it. That might be increasing your load in physio terms, so increasing what you're asking it to do. Like I know you did your beasting week recently, Alexander, didn't where you hit the gym really hard, and I know you broke yourself doing that.
It was great fun.
I saw the video. It looked a lot of fun. But equally, an emotional event, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, the stress might rise, and normally there's a message going up from that localized area. It's like, yeah, there's some stuff going on, but it's not that bad. When the stress rises or something, that can be a big thing suddenly or a steady increase. It's kind of like instead of going, oh, there's something going on, the brain goes, awooga. And it's kind of, that's when you start to feel the pain from that area.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Are you a satisfied questioner there, Alexander?
Yeah. That was all very interesting. Neil, go on then. Give us your first question.
Gosh, well, I feel a bit conflicted because I feel like part listener and part podcast host. So I've got to get my sort of podcast host hat back on. And I'm really aware of, like, we haven't got loads of time here, and I want to make my questions and my observations kind of thoughtful and relevant, Jamie. And I think where I'm going to go is, one of the questions I have is about, I'd like you to speak to this notion of how you listen to your body. Because I suppose on this podcast, one of the things we try to do is give people who listen to it some takeaways, and try and kind of delve down and deconstruct some stuff so that things might be a little bit more understood. And I'm acting here on a selfish level, because I'd love to know, because I talk about, I need to listen to my body more, but I mean, that may be a kind of a metaphor that doesn't have any leverage or mileage for you. It may be, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it means to you, what it can mean for other people to, in inverted commas, listen to your body.
Great question, Neil. And yes, get comfortable. I could talk about this for a very long time. I'll try and keep it succinct as I can, and as practical as I can for yourself and the listeners as well, Neil. So listening to the body is, I'm sure you guys know, it means different things for different people. Now, from my sports hat on, people, again, these are generalizations. I don't like generalizations. One of my big things actually is that everything I do is utterly bespoke for every person that comes through my door. It has to be. I'm sure you guys are the same in the work that you do. It's the same physically. But you can get some kind of generalizations. So the sports people, particularly high-end sports people who I've treated for many years, they have the ability to smash through everything, smash through stuff. Smash it is obviously a phrase of the moment, isn't it?
Can I just stop you there and just ask you what you really mean by that, to smash through? Because again, kind of talking sort of metaphorically. So what does that mean?
It's a big thing in sport and macho sport at the moment. It's just where you are aware of pain, or you're aware of something not quite being right, and you're so determined to achieve what you want to achieve that you just ignore it and carry on going. And that is, I think, if you're about to win an Olympic gold medal, I think that's an important trait to have. I think if you're a competitive dad and about to beat your kids at cricket, I think that's a less important trait to have. So there's a whole, obviously, array between those two extreme examples. I think as I've progressed and become more mind-body, I think more people I see are more, I suppose there's a kind of a body anxiety. And they're more concerned about what's going on. They're more fearful of their bodies. And I'd say that probably is generally more kind of, 75% of my clientele, whereas 25% are kind of more kind of pushing through things. One of the key things I would like to get across to that 75%, the ones who are a little bit more fearful, is there's a phrase that I think it's from the NOI group actually. Pain is not damage. I can't emphasize that enough. We have a culture where don't do that. That'll affect your knees. The whole running is bad for your knees. And whilst I'm at it, that's absolute nonsense. Just to put a bit more meat on that, your body needs the impact. Impact is really good for cartilage health. Belief is important. If you believe running is bad for your knees, then your knees will be bad. So it can be a convenient excuse. I'd rather people just said, I don't like running, it's not for me. That I have no problem with that. Find a different sport, or you don't even need to be sport, if you're not particularly sporty. Just activity, walking. If you enjoy walking, go out walking, and all the well-being and health benefits that you get from that. I think a lot of it is also going off on one side, is not trying to pretend to be, someone that you're not as well. Just being in tune with what your body is good at, and I'm a swimmer, so I have a good set of lungs on me. So when I have run a marathon, I won't be doing it again. But I have a good set of lungs, so my lungs are good enough. They can take my body to a point where my muscles tighten up too much because I can keep going and going and going. And that was kind of my experience of marathon training. With all the knowledge I had, I really did struggle with the pure mileage of everything. And I think that's really important for people to be aware of what their body's good at and what they're capable of. We're all capable of whatever we want to. If you take your time long enough, the body is incredibly adaptable. But you have to do that in an appropriate way. So yeah, listen to that body. It's like I said, it means different things to different people. But hopefully that gave you an idea of lots of things, and to the listeners as well.
Yeah, certainly. I really like and appreciated your kind of permission givingness to people to say, like, I think you said something like you'd rather people just say, well, I don't like running, rather than trying to be someone they're not, and again, I found it really helpful what you said about it doesn't have to be a sport. It could be a kind of form of exercise. I mean, me and my partner do an awful lot of walking. That's probably our main thing. We very much notice the mental health benefits of that, so I really like that kind of permission giving. Listen to your body, whatever that means for you, and see what it likes, see what it doesn't like. Yeah.
And sorry, Neil, just adding to that, it's, again, I think we were talking about embodiment in preparation for the podcast, and we were talking about modern society and the busyness that goes on within society, and just there's a lot of people spend, myself included, and certainly when I started doing the work with Alexander, I was very guilty of this, is that the body just becomes a vehicle to move the head around or move the brain around. We spend so much time just thinking and worrying and being anxious or being depressed or whatever our thing is, that we don't really notice what's happening to our body. And that's been a big change for myself. It's something, I work on with all I can. Just notice what your body's doing. How am I walking? Am I walking freely? Am I walking with tension? Is there something I can let go of? How am I breathing whilst there's a whole raft of stuff in terms of relaxation breathing, and it's just great. And yeah, there's lots of just splinters within the group of, you should do a 4-4-4 or a 4-5-7, or you've got the Wim Hof stuff, or you've got some just trying to think of some of the other, Buteyko breathing's another one, holotropic breathing, that's an interesting one as well. There's all kinds of stuff out there, but that, and that, I think that comes back to that kind of fight or flight. And if we are aware of what we're, and one of the things, a lot of people almost say, when you fight or flight, and you should be ashamed of that. Actually, no, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. It's an incredible, it's a survival mechanism. That's what it's there for. But it's when we spend all of our time in that fight or flight. Our fight or flight was originally designed to help run away from saber-toothed tigers or whatever, or catch our prey. The amount of stress that we are exposed to isn't the same magnitude on minute by minute basis. But with modern society, what it is more of a drip feed of stress. And so it just means that we're kind of on that kind of high alert phase. So the more time we can spend in our more relaxed state, and by recognizing what our breath is doing, by actually genuinely relaxing, and I'd say that's active relaxation rather than slobbing out in front of the TV, then we just calm our nervous systems and bringing it back to pain. Simply put, the calmer your nervous system, the less pain you feel. It's as simple as that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to say gosh again. There you go, gosh. One of my antiquated old words that I use. Thank you, James. I'm really aware of, there's so much material here, and I'm aware of time as well. And I'm aware of, I think you mentioned earlier on about maybe another episode. So in some ways, for me, it feels like we're kind of scratching the surface here. So what I'm going to suggest is that maybe we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, okay, Jamie. What are your embodiment practices?
Oh, good one. So I think for me, the key one is the relaxation breathing. I'll be honest, I'm not practicing actively at the moment. Slap on my wrists. I do have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. That's my excuse. I'll throw that in there right now. But for me, I've done a lot of work on the breathing. So my diaphragm is, for those who don't know, diaphragmatic breathing is kind of a relaxation and regeneration state. So my diaphragm is actually pretty strong from the work I've done previously. So what that means is I can kind of call upon it any moment. I did some diaphragmatic breathing whilst you two were chatting, doing the check-ins, for example. I was a little bit nervous. So that kind of brought me back down to myself. That was really useful. I'll take a couple of breaths between clients. Sometimes we talk about some very, very serious stuff with my clients, as you can imagine. A lot of stuff comes out. So it's just a case of way of just bringing myself back down. That's really useful. And then when I get a moment away from the family, even if I just lie down for a couple of minutes, if I've got longer, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And interestingly, it's great prep for sport as well for me. Beach volleyball is my thing. And I find if I've done some kind of relaxation practice before I head down for a game, I do seem to play better. I think a big thing for me has been yin yoga. Big fan of most forms of yoga. I describe myself as a stereotypical repressed British man who's coped with lots of sport and therefore as stiff as an old boat for 45 years. That's how I describe myself. Yin yoga is my personal favorite just because it's very slow. You hold the positions for 3 to 5 minutes. And it just gives you, and you're really focused on that breath, and it's about letting go. And I said in the answer to one of the previous questions, most of us are too stiff and tight. And so, and I'm the embodiment of that. So it's kind of just kind of letting go of that, and it gives you time to do that in a really nice way. There's great stuff on YouTube if you're interested in following that. Just type in YouTube, just type in yin yoga into YouTube. The other yogas are great. They are a bit more kind of fluid, and that's for the person. You'll know your different style. For me, as someone who is quite tight from a life of sport, then I'm building up to it, I would say. So if you want a bit more strength, then you want a more flow style of yoga. And then I think just one final point, like just in terms of my personal stuff, it's just more kind of self-awareness and more understanding of my mind, really. I know I'm a physical therapist, so to speak. But it is that presence of the mind and just that overlap and being aware of how you hold yourself in response to stress. And it's not like you shouldn't be beating yourself up about that. It's just recognizing that in yourself. I'll give you a personal example. I used to joke, my quadriceps are the envy of many a bodybuilder. I'm not a bodybuilder by any stretch, but they've always been very, a lifetime swimming front crawl races. But they switch on when they don't need to. I often joke that my quadriceps brush my teeth for me, because that is my response to stress. So if I've been working too hard, I will lean forward slightly, my quadriceps will tense, and as a result, my back overworks because I'm leaning forward slightly. So the muscles that pull me back have got a little bit more work to do. That's my thing. I don't beat myself up over that anymore. I'd prefer I didn't do it, but I recognize that I do. And it's just maybe taking a couple of breaths, recognizing when I've gone there, reground myself, and then I thought, oh yeah, that feels better. I feel back to myself again. So awareness, I'd say, would be my final answer to that question.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, my final question is something around belief. You talked about belief before, and I'm really interested in this idea. I'd like you to speak to this, or what your comments are on. Is it your experience that someone coming to work with you and receive intervention treatments from you, is it your experience that to a degree they have to have some belief in the potential of what you're offering, even though they may not be the kind of, there yet or the finished article?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Neil. I think belief is huge, absolutely huge. I think you need to be, as someone coming to us, you need to be open to our ideas. We're quite explicit on our website now that, we're going to be talking about what's going on in life. I think if you are closed emotionally, then you are closed physically. At which point I'm probably banging my head against a brick wall, trying to unravel that, so to speak. I think you need to be open to, again, the thing that I spoke about before. We do a lot of work in the tummy. A lot of emotions are held in the tummy. Gut feels, as you guys spoken about on previous podcasts. A lot of emotions are held there, and that has a physical representation in the body in terms of muscularly. It's great because when we release that emotional, or the physical representation of that emotional, sometimes we get the emotional release, and on a lesser degree, we just kind of feel more relaxed. We feel more in our bodies again. So yeah, the belief is key, because the brain is so powerful; it can manifest whatever you believe. I've kind of made up this, what the brain believes, the body perceives, is a huge point. Alluded to previously. If you believe you're going to get knee problems because your family has had knee problems, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you'll always be in pain, then you always will be. But equally, some people want to not be in pain, but they've tried lots of things and that hasn't worked for them. And part of my job is trying to give people hope, as I mentioned in the introduction. There's lots of different ways physically that you can interrupt that, and there's lots of different ways emotionally you can interrupt that, and obviously there's the overlap between the two. My job, particularly when I first meet a client, is to show that most of the guys, because of the way we advertise, are open to that concept. And it's just being able to see a shift and a change to help them. They want to believe that they can not be in pain. But it's showing them something where they go, oh yeah, no, that feels better. I can feel that there's been a change there. And that's the kind of the light bulb moment. Oh yeah. So one of my things is that, arthritis isn't the be all and end all that perhaps it's made out to be. I've helped many people with arthritis over the years, and it's all very good and well spouting the research says that cartilage wear and tear isn't an accurate predictor of pain. That's in physio terms. But if you can do something, let's just say by releasing something off in someone's stomach, to then get them back up. Maybe you've done a squat, or maybe they were in pain walking around, and then they walk around in less pain, or their squat feels less painful. Then they start to believe, and that's your gold moment right there. Because as soon as you've got that, they're on your page. They understand all the research and that I've been doing for the last 17, 18 years of my life, and then you're working together to come to that conclusion to. Reduce pain, but ultimately it's improving the quality of people's lives.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Jamie. Gosh, again, that seems very fulsome. I'm aware of time. We need to kind of wrap up. But before we do so, what I'd really like to do, just very briefly from each of us, is a takeaway from today, just to finish it off before we do our usual closing bits. So, Alexander, take away from today.
Okay, I think my takeaway from all the things that Jamie said to us today, and it's been very dense and there's been an awful lot in there, I really hone in on this. I think the phrase you use is that pain is not injury, and just kind of the allowing that can open up. Just, oh, okay, so I've got the history of this part of me hurting a lot, or every time I do this exercise, this happens, or if I actually try exercising, I always end up hurting myself in the same way. Just to be curious about that, and just not to think of it as that's an inevitability, not to have a belief that I can never do that thing, but to be curious about different ways of approaching things, and maybe do a bit of research and do a bit of reading and do a bit of exploring, and maybe come and see someone like yourself and just open that up and allow for different beliefs to come into play. I mean, I really enjoyed what you said about our bodies are amazingly adaptable. I was an incredibly non-physical person. I don't have anything like your background in sport, but about 12, 15 years ago, I decided to start getting into gym training. I started getting into weightlifting, and it's now become what I do, and I love it, and my body has adapted to it. So, yeah, I'm just a big believer in that, and a big believer, or at least a big supporter of the stuff you're saying around just reconsider, just approach this from a new angle, just allow different things to be true.
Thanks, Alexander. What I take away is what you said, Jamie, about this invitation or this permission-giving aspect about people making some form of physical activity or, inverted commas, exercise or sport or whatever it is, making something their own that works for them. That's come across really loud and clear, and I really appreciate that. And it made me think that on Sunday, I gave myself my own little kitchen disco. And I haven't given myself a kitchen disco for years. So I was making dal, and I was chopping courgettes, and I was bopping along to Left Field and Stevie Wonder and Chic and McFadden and Whitehead. And I just really noticed how, because previously, earlier in the day, I'd felt a bit down, but just that spontaneous sort of physicalized release just completely kind of changed my modus operandi, my kind of mental state. So it's a kind of reminder to self there to allow myself to have those things that not only work for me, but those things that I like. Yeah.
Yes, no, I mean, the body is designed to move. It's not designed to be still.
Sure. Takeaway for you, Jamie.
Yeah, I'd just like to finish on a couple of different definitions of pain to really kind of finish off, really. I'll do 3, if that's not overindulgent. The first one is to give you an idea, to reinforce the message that I gave across in terms of pain is not damage. It's from a guy called Louis Gifford, who's sadly no longer with us. Pain is an opinion of the organism's state of health, rather than a mere reflexive response to injury. So I think that really kind of summarizes all the things that we spoke about. There's another similar one, which I'll go straight into, from Dr. Lorimer Moseley, who's part of the NOI group. Pain is an unpleasant conscious experience that emerges from the brain when the sum of all the available information suggests that you need to protect a particular part of your body. So the key thing I want to highlight there is the sum of all of the available information. In real terms, that might be that something is just painful. It might just be that someone's just put a hammer onto your shin. But it's the wider context of here of all those different factors involving stress, how you're holding yourself, what's going on in life, etc., etc. And then there's this one that is bringing it full circle into the whole mind-body thing, and it just came to me on my Twitter feed this morning, which is a really lovely coincidence from my business coach. You can't outrun your pain. You are strong enough to face whatever is in front of you. Medicating your pain will only bring more pain. The only genuine shortcut life offers is facing your feelings. They won't kill you. Feelings are your soul's way of communicating. Pain is trying to teach you something. If you don't listen now, it will speak louder and louder until it is heard. And on that, just to emphasize that point, I guess my final thought is that it's just a call to action, really, to do something. If you've had physical treatment before that hasn't worked, try some other physical treatment. If you tried all the physical treatment under the sun, just think about the mind side of this. You can make huge progress by just looking, working with the likes of our wonderful Alexander and Neil, and making huge progress in that regard. And then actually your body will be better placed to unravel physically. So it's really being, as I said, listening to yourself, listening to your body and your mind, and understanding, what is the best way forward for you. It might be physical, it might be mental, it might be both.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Lovely. So, just to say, by way of finishing, we very much hope you've enjoyed our first episode with a guest, the wonderful Jamie. And if you do want to get in touch with any of us, then we will give you our contact details now. Alexander, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, they can go onto my website, which is deepcoaching.co.uk. In the top right-hand corner, you'll see a link to be able to book a consultation call with me. But on the same form, you can just drop me an email. It'd be great to hear from you.
Thank you. And people can get in touch with me through my website, www.coachingforlifefroome.co.uk, and go to the contact details page there. And for you, Jamie?
Yes, to contact me, probably the best way is to go to our website, which is brightonsportstherapy.co.uk, and there's a contact form on there. There's also a lot of free stuff on the website. If you go to the articles section there, a lot of what I've spoken about, lots of different articles of detailed specific injury conditions, and also the wellbeing stuff is on there as well. And on Twitter, I'm at Jamie Webb 9 Steps. Put a lot of stuff out on there at the moment. And on Facebook and YouTube, just search for Brighton Sports Therapy. Lots of free and useful stuff on there as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, the final thing to say is that our next episode in a couple of weeks' time is going to be on the topic of self-belief. And with that, it's cheerio from me.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me, guys.